Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another electrifying masterclass with our friend and collaborator and partner, Mr. Daniel Strode. Daniel is a very good friend of mine, and I've had the pleasure to dine with him when I was in Madrid, and we both share a deep passion for people and culture. He is currently the global head and director of culture and strategy at Banco Santander. It's one of the biggest banks in Europe. He also has one of the biggest digital banks now in Europe. So he's the custodian of culture, holding the torch of what does it mean to work, live, be, grow the Santander way. And the challenge there is, this is not a startup. They're operating in 32 countries and more than 200,000 employees. So he really believes that culture is a driver for innovation. And I think this is kind of the anchoring point for today's session. He is also a colleague with me at IE Business School. We both teach in a master's program there. And he recently published a book called The Cultural Advantage, and he's been touring with the book. Daniel, I know that has been interesting and a lot of travel and a lot of sleepless nights, but I'm very happy to see that it's, more people are seeing it and more people are reading it. I read it. It's a great, easy read. So Daniel, thank you again for joining us, and the floor is yours, my friend.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and pleasure and welcome to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. Probably you can teach me much more than I can teach you about the world of business, the world of startups, the struggles and the things you're going through. But indeed, I want to share with you a couple of things around culture today and how that can really push and drive your business and your success moving forwards, right from today all the way through into the future. And I want to share with you some things about why is it important as a business to change, why culture is important, and then look specifically at leadership and technology as two concrete things within culture today. And then just to let you know, I'm going to come back at the start of August to do a feedback masterclass, which is very much linked to some of the things we'll see today. So if you can attend both sessions, that would be wonderful for me. And I will put into the chat here, anybody who would like to take a free copy of the book, you just have to email the word book to info@danielstrode.com, and we will have that sent out to you after the session today. So this is our gift from all of us here to yourselves as well. So without further ado, let me share my screen and see if I don't fall at the first hurdle of technology. Hopefully you can now see the presentation on the screen there. If you have any questions during the session, feel free to interrupt, to ask, to comment as we go along. Either just unmute yourself and ask the question, or go into the chat box and I can monitor that as we go along. So we're running for about 90 minutes today, and 90 minutes in the next session as well. There is a lot of material to cover in these two sessions. So if we don't get through everything today because you're having loads of questions, not a problem at all. We'll follow on in the next session, and vice versa. If we need to go through more, we'll do that as well. So as I say, today is a masterclass for people exactly like you, people who are founders and leaders of startups, entrepreneurs, and people trying really hard and new things in the world of business. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to learn some of the principles to really unlock what I call the culture advantage. So why is this important? Well, let me tell you what you already know. We are, of course, living in a fourth industrial revolution. Now, you're all too young to remember the first industrial revolution, even the second, and probably the third to some extent. We've lived through, as a society, many revolutions before, but they've typically been just one thing happening at a time. So the steam engine came along and changed the world. Electricity came along and changed the world. Well, where we're living now is we're living in a very digital world, but there's not just one technology changing the world. It's multiple things at the same time. So it's the fact that we are now all connected through 5G and high-speed internet access. It's the fact that we're now all living in a Web3 world with an Internet of Things in our house. It's the fact that we have unlimited computing power thanks to the cloud, and that we have artificial intelligence, which, as you know, is the new trend in the world. Any one of these technologies on its own would be enough to cause a revolution. But given they're all happening at the same time, it means society is facing exponential change. And that's really good for startup founders and leaders, of course, because you're at the forefront of this change. You're at the forefront of having the opportunity to serve the customer in a better way. But what does it really mean? Well, it means people are more digital, more online than ever before. And if you look at what happens in an internet minute in 2022, last year, millions of actions are happening globally every single minute online. People are hyper connected. And it means their expectations are shifting. It means that people now want personalized service, simplicity in everything they do, transparency on their data, and accessibility 24/7. So in my industry, the world of banking, previously, 10 years ago, you didn't really have an online bank. If you wanted to look at your balance, you would go to the branch or you would go to an ATM and you would look and say, how much money do I have in my account? Well, what's the way of using a bank today? You have a mobile app, and actually it's 24/7. And when the bank system and infrastructure falls down and you have a 30-minute outage, imagine the pain that customers receive because of that. That is not acceptable and that is not good enough. But that's a world apart from where we've come from. So customer expectations are going much higher, but it's also changing jobs and society. Of course, I mentioned AI as one of these new technologies, but we're seeing that because of AI and automation, jobs are changing and being displaced. Now, everybody thinks of the doomsday scenario where all of the jobs go away and humans don't have to work anymore. I don't see that scenario whatsoever. I think, especially on the people side of things, we will need people to be people and human and have those human skills. But also, I don't think jobs will just be replaced straight away. I think we will see some skills being replaced, some parts of jobs being replaced, some automation in the process, and others will remain. And what that means is we as a human race will need to be able to continuously learn and focus on developing new skills as individuals. And that's the same for you in your companies and your companies as a whole. And finally, because of all this technology, we are, of course, seeing different societal implications and impacts. So we're seeing people much more focused on data privacy, cybersecurity, and then also ethics around the world is becoming a hot topic for business leaders. And actually, I believe those companies that are the most ethical and take the most ethical decisions are going to be the ones that win in the future. No one wants to have bias in their algorithms, for example, and we need to learn how to combat that. We need to make sure as a company we're doing ethical decisions. You know, in the banking sector, no one wants to be the bank that finances polluters of industry. No one wants to finance terrorist organizations. You need to stand true to your ethics and your principles around that. And I think, as I say, the companies that really care about those topics are going to be the ones who are super successful in the future. And I predict in the next few years, there will be chief ethics officers in all of the major companies around the world. So with this backdrop of everything changing in the world, what does it really mean in practice? Well, I love this graph here. This is real data, of course, and from a study that McKinsey did a few years ago. And basically what they found was the red line here is the average lifespan of the top 500 companies in the United States, the S&P 500. And 60 years ago, these companies were very successful and they lived for about 60 years on average. But most recently, the top 500 companies in the United States are now living only 15 to 20 years on average. And of course, thanks to medical improvements and, you know, all the great things humans are doing, the human lifespan is actually increasing. And as you can see, luckily for us, humans now outlive the biggest companies in the world. And the interesting thing is, if you extrapolate this data 5 years into the future, what does it mean? It means that 75% of the top 500 companies today in the United States will no longer be in the top 500 in just 5 years' time. So if I asked you all to think of the biggest 10 companies you can think of, you might say Meta, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM. And then I ask you, well, imagine 5 years from now, 7 or 8 of them will no longer be in the same shape or size as they are today. That's a massive opportunity for you as startup leaders, because you are the ones who are disrupting industries. You are the ones who are coming with new ideas and innovations, and you will be the ones that replace those companies in these indexes. And of course, I wish you all of that success as you go forwards, but you do have to be careful of a few things along the way. Yazan, I see one question from you.
Yeah.
Please feel free.
How are you?
Hi.
I'm just interested about the previous slide. So here, I think just for me to understand what you're trying to say is that the fact that the companies will not adapt to the dynamic changes and the disequilibrium environment, therefore they're going below, let's say, the top 500. It's not about the company being perished or let's say out of market being acquired or something like that, correct?
Exactly. So it will be a combination of those three things you've mentioned. You will have some companies who completely fall by the wayside and are out of business. You will have some that continue in business, but at a much smaller scale. And then you will have some that are ripe for acquisition and consolidation in the market. So all three of those forces at play. And I don't know the exact split of how it will be between each of them. But absolutely what you say is correct. And in fact, when you think about Nokia, this would be one example of a company that, well, it did actually go out of business and now it's there in a small way, but you could put it in the camp of continuing the business just at a smaller scale.
Okay.
And it's an interesting case study because Nokia in 2007, as you can see here, had more than 50% share of the smartphone market. And they were a company that fell into what I call the outcome bias. They thought that what they did in 2007 to be so successful would keep them so successful in the future. They thought basically that their success was as a result of their genius, not because they had luck, not because they fell onto technology at the right time. No, it was because they were genius and they can continue being genius in the future. And of course, as you know, the fantastic Nokia phone that you used to be able to just drop on the floor and break the floor with fell away. The iPhone came, Samsung came, HTC came. And the interesting thing was Nokia was oblivious to this. They couldn't see this problem happening to them. And it wasn't just Nokia, of course. It was famous firms like Kodak and Blockbuster who also went in the same direction of travel. So I always advise big companies, and I advise people in Santander, in our bank, that just because we are the number one bank in Europe, doesn't mean we will be the number one bank in Europe moving forwards. We have to keep changing. We have to keep adapting. But there is good news. I spent the last 2 or 3 years traveling around the world, looking at large companies like the Walt Disney Company and looking at startup companies like Gymshark. Many companies in many countries I've visited or spoke to their leaders and CEOs. And it was interesting to me because they all display the same common cultural traits. And for me, this is where I found the clues. This is where I found the power of culture and the reason for culture. And they told me or taught me these 8 key principles here. And we'll go into a few of them today and a few in a couple of weeks' time. So don't worry that I don't go through all 8 of them in this session or one by one. We will cover as many as we possibly can. So you can see the 8 principles here, and what I wanted to focus on first was just giving you a basic introduction or background into what is culture and why does it really matter. And of course, you've probably all heard the adage, culture eats strategy for lunch. I actually like to think that culture and business strategy go hand in hand, and I think they're very complementary to one another. I think that when you have strategy well defined and a culture going really well, that's when you have great outcomes. And I always think of it like this. I think if you have on a scale of 0 to 100, a 80 out of 100 strategy, you have a pretty good strategy, right? And the culture can be the multiplier of that. If you have a great culture, which is 100 out of 100, you can take the 80 and multiply by 100 and have a fantastic outcome. But if you have a low culture, a low willingness of your people, a low drive within your company, and you only have 10 out of 100, then the multiplication is much, much weaker. So you need both to happen at the same time. You need both to be really great, but it is the culture that can make or break the strategy. You could have a poor strategy, but a high willingness of your people, a high passion to do things, a high commitment to your customers, and you would be more successful. So you need people to do the execution of the strategy. Now, I wanted to ask you, and here again, you can just shout out or put anything in the chat, but we're going to look at these aspects here. But I wanted to know how much you know about culture already. So anybody have a definition of culture? What makes up culture? Why do you think culture is important? And even how do you measure culture? And I'll pause just for 1 minute, just to see if anyone has any reflections on these. And I'll check the chat here. Even has anybody been thinking about their culture in their company? As startup founders and leaders, what do you think about culture here? I see here, Saif, is the founders dynamics. I agree. In many startups, right here is the founders dynamics. And this is really interesting because what you do as a founder, what you display, the values and the behaviors that you display every day are going to be copied by everyone. So that is very, very important indeed. And Abir, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, good morning, Dan. Sorry, I can't type because I'm driving, but for culture, I think it's an ecosystem for that includes values, vibes, processes, interaction within the startup or the organization. And it includes also tangible and intangible components. So measuring it is quite, requires a lot of expertise and taking into consideration some of these components are intangible, but we can't see the influence on the performance and the productivity of the startup.
Yeah, this is a really, really great answer because you're right. Some of those things are tangible and some are intangible things that you absolutely cannot see. They are things that you can only perceive and feel. And actually, I'll come on to that in a very short while. So fantastic answers, everyone. And I'm reading the chat. Knowing very clearly the vision of the company and people believing in that is very important. This is exactly my point about the strategy. You may say our vision and our strategy is to be going from A to B. But if the people don't know that and they don't believe in that and they don't feel ownership, you may go from A to C instead of A to B. Absolutely. And then I see another one here, infrastructure of transactions. Absolutely. The way of doing things, the day-to-day routines and rituals that we are doing in the company. So, okay, good. You are not absolute novices or beginners at culture, which is great. It means you've given it some thought and have probably already done some things with your culture, which is fantastic. So I traced the word culture back to its Latin root, which is the word cultus, which means to care about people. And I really love this as a small definition of what culture is and what it means, because when we think about caring, Inherently, that means caring about our people, our customers, our shareholders, and our communities, all of our stakeholders. And that, of course, is the purpose of a company. The purpose of the company should never be just to make money. It should never be just to bring something to market. It should be treating all of your stakeholders with care and attention, fulfilling the needs that they want and they wish. And it's very interesting because if you look then at academics, you will find over 100 different definitions of corporate culture written in academia, which is, really, really tough and really, really confusing. But luckily, I have a very simple way of defining culture. And to me, it's the way we do things around here. It's the way we do things around here when no one is looking. And of course, this is important because if you think about the way you do things in your company, at the end of the day, your culture influences how your employees interact with one another, how they make decisions, how they approach their work, how they treat their customers. So this is why culture is important. This is why it's vital. Who doesn't want to influence how the employees interact with each other or treat the customers? This is business. So again, making strategic decisions is important, but making cultural decisions probably more important. And when we think about what are the components of culture, Jerry Johnson created in the 1980s this fantastic model called the cultural web. And this model actually sets out 6 different elements of what forms a company culture. And exactly as Abir said, there are some tangible and some intangible things that make up your company's culture. So you could think first about stories. Stories would be the things that we tell each other about the company. They could be very simple stories, like I went to a meeting and Dan was the chairman of the meeting and he started banging the table and getting angry. Or they could be nice stories. Dan went to visit a customer, the customer couldn't pay their bills, and he gave them an extension. So that also tells you something about the culture. So the stories that you see and hear day in, day out, how do people talk about your company? If you go to the market, if you go to recruit people, what are the stories that you tell about your company? The second element, symbols, is a very, very visually important clue about your culture. Does the chief executive park their car right by the door and the most junior person of the company have to park far away? That's a symbol about your culture. Do you have a private dining for the directors of your company and the rest of the employees have to eat a sandwich for lunch? This is also a symbol of your culture. And let me tell you, by the way, in Santander Bank, we have a headquarters where I am in Madrid with 6,000 employees. And when I joined 5 years ago to the bank, the directors of the bank had a private dining place for lunch. And it had waiters, and they would bring you the food, and you would order from the menu. And what happened to the rest of the employees? They would go to a general canteen. So what was one of the first things I did? I closed the private dining, and the directors went to eat in the normal canteens. And guess what? Nothing happened. But the symbol, the cultural symbol, changed, and the company changed as a result of that. We no longer thought that the directors were some scary senior people who had everything as they considered and couldn't be talked to and couldn't interact with, and how dare they eat a different type of food. No. All of that went out the window with that change. So symbols are important. Routines and rituals comes next. Your routine are things that you do day in, day out. So it might be, we have a meeting at 9 a.m. every day with the whole team for 10 minutes just to discuss a new product that we're launching. That's a routine. It's something we do typically as a matter of practice. But the rituals are what sets you apart when it comes to culture. These are the things that you don't do with a routine, and they're one-off or ad hoc things, but they tell you about the culture. So for example, you may decide to do an offsite with your team. That would be a good example of a ritual. You have to physically go somewhere, spend time with your team. Maybe it happens once a year, and you can reinforce the culture at that point. Yazan, a question.
Actually, you have raised a very important idea about symbols or symbols. The fact that, for example, sometimes you might try to uh, reduce the gap or the line between top management and regular employees. However, sometimes also this can fire back on you with the culture because sometimes having the open door policy between top management and employees is good to a certain limit, but sometimes employees take it for granted and they misuse it somehow. So how can we make sure that we can create an open door or let's say revise the symbols in a way that does not fire back later on the overall culture?
Yeah. So I would think, and one of the things I will share with you later is there's no one size fits all culture. So by the way, what I do in the bank or what I do with other companies, and for example, I've been working with Ferrari this year. This is a brand that you all know. If anybody's lucky enough to have a Ferrari, please let me know. They didn't give me one, but we'll get there in the end. So I've been working with them on their culture. And I compare Ferrari with the bank. And what do I see? I see two different cultures, very different cultures, and they are both working for their respective companies. So the point here is some things will work for some companies and other things won't work for other companies. And you cannot just copy and paste one culture into another company. So this is the first thing. But very specifically to your point about how do you stop things backfiring when it comes to this? Inherently, culture change is a slow process. And the good news is, believe it or not, everybody in the workplace is an adult. We shouldn't have people who are not adults in the workplace. And that is an advantage somehow. The advantage is that they behave like adults. And typically what you find when you give people more empowerment or more possibilities is they behave well. But it is true. Sometimes you will have some abuse in the system. And in those moments of abuse, you have to take action. And this is vital when you build a culture. When you see malpractice, you only have one option, which is to stop and remove that malpractice. And typically, you can do two things. The first is you give a warning. You say, guys, my door is open, but it does not mean you come to tell me that Johnny pushed Tim in the playground. It means you come to raise really important things. And this is an example of what that looks like. Okay, so we set the boundaries, we set the rules very clear. What happens when it's not respected again? That is when you have to cut that behavior from the culture. And typically, the hard advice I have to give is that means letting people go from the company because they are not fitting the culture. They are not behaving according to the standards you expect. And why do I say this? Why do I say to take such drastic action? Is because, well, I don't know if you did this in school, but in my school, they used to give a Petri dish. I suppose you know what is a Petri dish. Is like a plastic dish with a live culture inside. So some live material inside that Petri dish. And they asked the children, okay, bring back the Petri dish to the science class 1 week later. And we're going to look to see if this culture that you have inside is good or bad. And some children would come back 1 week later and it would be beautiful. Everything would have grown really well. It grows really well because they fed it the right nutrients. They gave it the right water, the right light, this kind of thing. But it goes bad very fast if a toxin goes into the dish. So if your dish gets contaminated, the bacteria grows fast. And you only have one option, is to cut the bacteria out. And it's the same in your culture. When you have a bad behavior, you have to cut it out fast. Because if you don't, it becomes the norm. It becomes the standard. Because this is human behavior that we're talking about. When humans see something, we typically copy. If you went to a shop and everybody was taking a chocolate bar from the shop, you would probably do the same because you would say, it's not fair. Everybody is stealing a chocolate bar and I'm not. Or everybody is stealing a chocolate bar and there's no consequence, so I'm going to do it. It doesn't make it right, but it becomes the culture and the norm. So I would always advise you to take action when you see something that you don't like, as hard as it may be.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So the final three cultural elements that Johnson proposed were organizational structure. And again, this tells you something about the organization. Do you have a flat structure? Do you have an open doors policy? Or do you have lots of layers, lots of approvals and bureaucracies in there, which is very much like power structures? Who in your company can make those decisions? Who in your company is deciding which projects get financed or funded? Who is deciding who gives the green light to a new product or a service? Who decides which customer to take on? Who has the biggest influence over recruitment? All of those things indicate power in a company. And if it's your finance team who has the final say on new products and services or new hires, that means your finance team is the one in charge of your company. If it's a joint decision and a mutual decision, that indicates you have a much more open and free culture. And again, like I say, there's no one size fits all, so there's no right or wrong to this, but be aware that those people who have power in your company are having an oversized influence on the culture. And finally, the control systems, very much aligned to the organizational structure and the power structures within it. What type of controls do you have in place? So do you need 20 people to say yes to a new product? And if one person says no, the product is rejected? Or do you need one person to say yes and 20 people to say no? How is that balance? How are those controls in your company? Do you have too much bureaucracy? Do you have too much process? Those things are also indicators of your culture. And of course, in banking, so in my industry, it's important we keep customers' money safe. So I need a lot of controls in the business. I need to be able to do things very carefully. I need cybersecurity to sign off on things first. That's important. So I'm happy with those control systems. But if you're a startup and you're a founder or a leader of a startup, you might not want those controls because you might want to go at a faster pace. You might say, we're happy shipping a product at 20% quality to the customer because we're going to test and learn. A bank can't necessarily do that, but maybe you can. So you need to make sure that they're appropriate for you. And as well as Jerry Johnson, we had another academic called Edgar Schein, who said there were 3 levels of culture. And you can see here that he said there were artifacts, values, and assumptions and beliefs that make up your culture. And they are not dissimilar things really to what Jerry Johnson was saying. You can see here that you have the structures and the practices and the processes. So they're your artifacts. But then your business strategy and your goals are your values. So things that you write down and say, these are important to us. And then the unwritten rules are your power structures, are your organizational structures, are the stories that you tell. So a very similar model. But I think, again, if you like the academic side of culture, have a look at both of these models to learn more, because they have really stood the test of time, both from the 1980s and both still very, very prevalent and dominant today. So let me tell you something about Santander and the bank that I work in and what I've been doing in the previous years. Well, we started our cultural transformation 6 years ago. And we actually defined a set of values, which were to say we want to be simple, personal, and fair as a bank. And we said, okay, how do we become simple, personal, and fair as a bank? We need to have some behaviors that underpin those. And actually, we created 8 behaviors 6 years ago, and we were going very successfully for 5 years with those behaviors. And last year, we decided we need to change those behaviors and adapt them and refresh them for the future. So the bank did a very big transformation in the past 6 years. We went from being a very much bricks and mortar bank to being a digital bank with branches. But we knew that if we want to go to the next stage of evolution, what we used to do wouldn't get us there in the future. The same as Nokia thinking that what they used to do would keep them there in the future, we realized it wouldn't. So we listened to our customers and our employees, and we asked them, what do you think are the most important things for us to be successful? And they came up with this acronym here that you see on the screen called TEAMS. These are now the 5 behaviors that we have in the bank, and they are think customer. So making sure the customer is at the heart of everything we do. Embracing change. So knowing that the world around us is changing and we need to adopt that and accept that. And acting now, which means going fast, not wasting time, but being able to pivot, being able to reduce bureaucracy, being able to go fast, moving together as teams, as individuals. Going together, we know we can achieve more. So we're really, really focused on breaking the silos in the company, sharing information between ourselves and working together. And then the final one, speak up, because we know everybody has a voice. 200,000 people in the company. We have a fantastic opportunity and a rich diversity. We need to know those opinions and views of people. So we came up with this acronym TEAMS and launched the new corporate behaviors 1 year ago. And I think that was important for us. But it's an important reflection for you. What is the reflection? The reflection is the culture you set yesterday need not be the culture for the future. Okay? So you can change your culture. You don't have to be ashamed of that. You need to be constantly tweaking and adapting your culture. So you can't just set it and say, we're done, we don't have to do any more work. You have to keep fostering it. And, I'm very proud to live in the bank and work in the bank. Let me tell you why. There's one story that sticks out from the pandemic. And of course, you all remember the pandemic. You all suffered loss during the pandemic. And I'm sure it's very personal and hurts you a lot when you think about the pandemic. Well, I don't know if any of you went to Scotland before in your life. If anyone went to Scotland, do type it in the chat. Not many people go there. It's a pretty cold place. I haven't been, but apparently it's a very beautiful place as well. Anyway, Scotland is in the north of the United Kingdom. And if I think about major towns and cities around the world, I think about Madrid, London, Jordan, wherever that might be, you typically have a population density that's very high. So you have thousands of people living in a square kilometer. Well, in Scotland, you don't really have that population density. In Scotland, and especially some of the remote places, you can have a population density of 2 or 3 people per square kilometer. Okay, so you are a long way away from being a city or a town. And there was this place in the north of Scotland. And one day, one of the branch managers phoned me and said, Dan, how are you? I just wanted to tell you a story. And I said, okay, Scott, tell me the story. And he said, well, my branch is basically the heartbeat or the hub of the community. COVID just came along. We opened the branch a few weeks later. We had the employees wearing masks and gloves. We put some plastic in between the customers and the employees, and we opened to serve the customers. And an old man came into the branch one day with a bag of coins. And he came to the counter and put the bag of coins on top of the counter. And I said, okay, Scott, so what did you do? Did you tell the customer to go away? Because, COVID is going on. The last thing the employees want to do is to count slowly a bag of coins, touching dirty money, having the customer close to them, breathing the same air for 20 minutes whilst you're counting. And Scott said, no, we served the customer. We counted the money and put it into his account. And I said, wow, that's pretty amazing that you would take that risk and do that, given we didn't know what COVID was or how it was transmitted. It was a scary thing at the time. And he said, yeah, but Dan, it was very important that we served this customer. Let me tell you why. And as the cashier was counting the money, the customer started to tell them his story, which was his local food shop was closed because of COVID. There was no other food shop within 30 or 40 miles of his house. He didn't have a car because he was an old person and he couldn't get food. So his only option was to order food online using his debit card, which he had never done before because he only ever used cash. And if we didn't take those coins and put them into his account, he would have never been able to order food for him and his elderly family. And even as I tell you this story, the hairs on my arm go up, because I say, this was an example of people in the bank living our purpose, which is to help people and businesses prosper. The natural human reaction would be to say, please go away and come back again. But actually, in this case, we did lead with purpose and empathy, exactly. And, you know, this was us living our culture. So I'm very, very proud of the culture we built. And I hope you can reflect on this story and see the type of culture you're building as well. Who are your customers? What's your purpose? What are you doing to help them? How do you help them prosper? What do you do day in, day out to live your culture? But of course, it's not just Santander. Everybody can use their values and their purpose to create value. And actually, Disney is a fantastic example of this. You probably know the CEO of Disney is Bob Iger, fantastic businessman. And during his time as CEO of Disney, he's bought a lot of different companies. So he's bought Marvel, he's bought Pixar, he's bought National Geographic, he's bought ESPN Sports Network, and all of these companies you see here on the screen. And the interesting thing is, he was asked, why did Disney buy these companies? And he explained that actually Disney bought these companies less for the intellectual property they had, but more for the culture that they had. He admired specific people and specific ways of working and attributes within these companies. And that's the reason he bought them into the Disney group of companies. And to me, that was, you know, one of the greatest CEOs of our time, really explaining to the market his acquisition strategy and the importance of culture. And, you know, there's no better example of Pixar, perhaps, who basically were bought because of their culture. Disney was struggling as a film studio a few years ago. They just couldn't, for love nor money, release a film that was having a smash hit. But Pixar, with their animation, was releasing every single year blockbusters, very successful videos and films. And Bob Iger bought Pixar and incorporated them into Disney. And he learned and he knew that some of the things Pixar did were making them successful. And one of them we'll see in the next session, actually, but it was about giving and receiving feedback within the company. They had created a process and a culture whereby employees, as they were working on new movies, would add value, plus the movies, give new ideas, try to enhance the movies as a group of employees. And typically what they were doing in Disney was the opposite. Whenever another employee had feedback about a movie, they would be told to be quiet, to go away, not to challenge or threaten my authority. But in Pixar, they welcomed that feedback and they'd built that into their culture. So Pixar started to take that great culture and infuse it into Disney, and Bob Iger's strategy was to do that. And then Disney started having major successes once again in the films. So I think that's a good story there. Now, the question really is, how do you change culture? And, you know, in Santander, like I say, we've been doing this 6 years journey of culture change. We've been focusing a lot on the things you see here on the screens. So we've been focusing a lot about having world-class leadership, being great at communications, having the behaviors and the competencies that people need in the company, measuring our culture to see that we're going in the right way, and then building those structures and symbols as well. And, you know, our journey, as I say, started in 2015. And it's been a difficult journey. So let me say, the good news is, and the advantage you have as a startup, is you are probably working in a company with just a handful of people. You are probably working at a time where the company is quite new. It's like a flower that's just starting to grow. And that's an advantage when it comes to culture, because it's easier to shape. When you're in a bank of 200,000 people in 32 countries, it's kind of like an oil tanker. You need to change the direction very slowly and carefully. Otherwise, you're going to capsize in the middle of the ocean and fail. So In Santander, we went on this slow process. We went on this 6 years process, this 5 years process. And basically the first 2 years or year and a half was really about awareness of our culture. So we started talking to people about being simple, personal, and fair, about the behaviors. And we did that awareness piece. So we would be able to say to employees, this is our culture, and this is what we expect. And we started to measure it with an engagement survey. We started to reward it through behavioral recognition platforms. We started to get the message out there. And then we moved into the next year and a half, which was really about understanding it. So we started to say to people, okay, now you've heard about the culture. Do you understand it? And can you do it in your day-to-day? And we started doing things like changing our reward mechanism. So you probably all know banks typically is not a nice industry. I would even tell my parents I'm a policeman than a banker, because you get people really upset when you tell them you're a banker, especially the 2008 financial crisis and all of these problems. Well, bankers, of course, used to have bonuses which were 100% based upon the outcomes that they did. We were the first bank in Europe to change that. We said you will be rewarded 60% on what you do and 40% on how you do it. And today we're actually in a 50-50 model. So employees are rated 50% on what they do. So how many mortgages did they sell? But 50% on how they did it. Did they follow our behaviors? Have they acted in an ethical way? Have they followed our culture? And that has been a very big change for us. So we started to make people understand that this is important for them. This is not just a marketing campaign. This is something that is necessary. Yazan, a question, please.
Actually, this is like music to my ears, because I'm just thinking about the impact of culture. We always tend to look at culture just about how people are interacting, but eventually it piles up to the level of how company is adapting and achieving its objectives. One of the things that wonders me a lot is the fact that at the end of the day, when you bring new people to the company, there will be always competition. This competition can either be positive or negative, but there is this tendency always, whenever the company becomes bigger, to have a more negative competition. And eventually it impacts the desire of employees to work, because you're at the end of the day pushing them towards exiting rather than staying in the company, because they're not seeing the value of them staying due to the negative competition and the mob, let's say, culture approach. So having that being said, what kind of pinpoints you suggest to maintain the competition there in a positive manner? Because at the end of the day, even in the rewarding system, whatever you give to the employees, they will say, no, I deserve more, or I deserve better than X or Y or Z. And at the end of the day, they're not looking at the bigger picture. They're looking at a micro level on their own achievements without being aware of the others, even if you communicate that with them. So how can we create this balance? Again, we're still small, but it's not. It's a good idea to look how we can build this structure in a proper way for us later on when we expand. Thank you.
I love this question, and it's true. Competition can be healthy when it's done correctly. So that's the first thing to say. Competition can be a healthy thing, and you do want competition in your company because somehow it pushes you to go further, which is great. I think we've proven that the old management techniques, like what GE was using and Jack Welch was using, which was this rank and yank system, where he would rank all of the employees and fire the bottom 10% every year, has been proven to be detrimental to the company. So I think we've learned on a management level that just firing the lowest performers is not a way to be successful. But what are companies doing in response? More and more, they are focusing on leadership. And one of the traits that they're asking leaders to focus on is to think about the company as a whole rather than their department or their individual responsibilities. So if I look at Santander, this year we have started leadership commitments with our top 2,000 leaders, and they are things like sharing talent. So the typical behavior of a leader is, let me have the best people in my team and keep them in my team. They don't have a career, they work for me. Well, now I am measuring and assessing people on talent liquidity. Who did they move from their team somewhere else? How many international movements have they had? So those kind of things. I'm also measuring their group first mindset. So whenever they make a decision, an action, a product, a service, are they trying to share that across the whole group? We have regions in Santander. So we have a European region, North America and South America. Probably what you find is, if I have a really great product or service in the United Kingdom, it probably applies very well in Poland. So the question is, if I'm thinking about the group and the company first, surely my solution should be for all of the European countries. Or again, am I just keeping it to myself because I want to look the best on paper? So we're trying to change that culture very much. And I think you can do that with some leadership interventions. So moving on to the most recent years, really, is we started in 2019 talking externally about our culture. So we started making commitments publicly to our investors that we're going to be a top company to work for in our markets. We started publishing our code of conduct, all of this kind of things, some of the results from our surveys. And, actually since 2020 onwards, the world has started to demand from companies to know about their culture. So the investors, you've probably all heard about things like ESG, environmental, societal, and governance things. This is something that the world is looking at. They are looking for companies that are environmentally friendly, following good rules of society, having good governance. They are also considering culture as a very important aspect of that, because they know this is when employees can speak up and contribute and add value and those kind of things. So we really moved into that phase of talking publicly about this and then embedding it in everything we do. So, some of the subtle things we've done is, you probably know, in United Kingdom, when you have a baby, you can have 12 weeks of maternity or paternity paid for by the company. If you go to America, you have 0. So what did we decide to do as a group? We decided to take the maximum amount of maternity and paternity that we had in all of our countries and apply it to all of our employees, because we thought that was the right thing to do. So now people in the United States have 12 weeks of maternity or paternity, which is absolutely wonderful for the company, because not only is it the right thing to do for the employee, but people want to work in Santander because that's a massive benefit that no one else is getting in the United States. So here you're using your culture not only as a way to attract and retain the top talent, but also doing the right thing. So it's definitely a long process, especially a long process in large companies. But if you're a startup founder or leader, it's something you can implement a bit more fast than perhaps I can. So that's the good news there. And on this slide, here is some of the things that we've been doing. So, when I think about speaking up, having anonymous escalation channels for people to report things is very important. For having ideas channels to encourage innovation and resolution, where any employee can contribute ideas, people can rank those ideas. Very important to do that crowdsourcing. Having good governance around the topic of culture, very important. You need sponsorship of these things. You cannot be successful in culture if your CEO and your board are not aligned with it. They have to be the first people aligned with it, because remember, you may define a great culture, but then your board or CEO behaves in the opposite way, then the employees will not behave in the way that you want them either. So you need that full alignment. And here you can see many of the tactics we have used. Measuring, of course, is always a very, very difficult thing and a tricky thing to do when it comes to culture. But we have many ways of measuring. So we have engagement surveys, which give us some quantitative numbers. We have our public commitments to the market, which is to be in external rankings, top companies. So we do those kind of things, but then we also assess more qualitative things. So we have a look at how many people are taking part in our cultural activities, how many people are doing the 360 feedback with the other employees, how many people are having their performance ranked and being given top scores in how they do things. So all of those kind of things we're measuring as well. And of course, we look at what's our brand perception, our customer satisfaction, and typically you see the correlation. You see the correlation between happier customers and happier employees. It's a very clear correlation. So putting those data sets together has also helped us. So as I say, there is no one size fits all approach to culture, to innovation, but you do need to consider your culture. And I made a study of all of these very, very successful companies. These are perhaps some of the most innovative companies in the world, and you know many of them, I'm sure. The interesting thing is they all have different structures. Okay. They all have different structures, so they all work in different ways. Now, let me explain just a couple of them. Does anybody want to tell me 2 companies off this list that they find interesting? And I'll explain something about the 2 of them. Okay, so here we are in the chat. Okay, Autodesk and Hubram. Perfect. Okay, so Autodesk and Hubram. Okay, perfect. Let me see where they are. Okay, so Hubram here. This is a tech incubator of T-Mobile. You probably know T-Mobile, the mobile phone company and the network provider. Hubram, as I say, is their tech incubator. So what do? They work as if they're a startup in a garage. So you all know the story of Amazon starting in the garage and Google starting in the garage of somebody's house. Is the same here. Basically, their structure is low money, few resources, and acting and behaving just in a startup. So what they do is they go around looking for partnerships with other companies or looking for really individuals or small companies to invest in. And they basically say, we're going to accelerate your business. We're going to work with you. We're going to give you like 10 weeks to go and do things and basically incubate your products. And they've done this in Africa. They've done this in North America. They've done this in South America. They've taken services of other companies and they've grown them by using this startup garage approach and acting like entrepreneurs. Autodesk, of course, is a software company, and they have a different strategy. What they've done is they've polluted their products with new ideas. So they've also gone to the market and they've said, who has new ideas for software? And other companies have approached them and said, well, we have this software that digitalizes images. We have this software that scans these documents, whatever that might be. And they've said, okay, let's take that technology and put it into our existing products. So they've added or polluted their existing products and brought new things to the table. So the interesting thing between these 2 companies is they're both successful and they've done their success in different ways. But they did have one thing in common, which was their culture. So they followed most of those 8 principles that we've already seen previously. So when I look at all of these companies here, these 10 companies, they all do things in different ways. They all have different business strategies and different structures, but they all have a common culture. And I think that's important. This gives us a clue about not only the importance of culture, but how to do it, how to replicate that in your companies. And I always like to say, culture is your sustainable advantage. You know, people can copy little pieces of it, but actually the whole system makes your company unique. You cannot have your culture copied, but you can have your strategy copied. Okay. So this is what's going to set you apart. And I think this is the key for you as a startup leader or founder, because actually you don't have big teams. You don't have big budgets. So this is how you compete. You know, you're trying to attract people to a risky venture. You're trying to attract people to a company that maybe doesn't have prospects in the long term. You're trying to attract people to a company where salaries are perhaps lower than the market, but your culture absolutely helps you in this. So it's very, very important and really vital. So I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes with you, again, loud in voice or in the chat, thinking about these questions. I wanted you to name some of the most innovative companies that you know of, and also think about what are the elements or the characteristics that they display. What makes them innovative? Why are they innovative? You may even choose your own company and tell me what are the cultural factors that make you innovative? What environments do you have? Why do you think it's important? And I wanted to try to capture just 2 or 3 things about what makes an innovative company. What do you think is a good culture to have? What do you need? So I'll pause just for 1 minute. Anybody who wants to talk, feel free, or type into the chat and I'll read them out and go through them. So I see Abir put into the chat SpaceX. That was a good company to think about. They were actually doing what I would call, I would say SpaceX was doing like total disruption. They basically said, we're going to change the industry massively. We're going to change the way that space flight is done, and we're going to disrupt everything. So we're going to start again from ground zero principles. And Mastercard Labs was also a good company to really be thinking about, because they were really, really focused on being customer centric. So they were putting the customer at the heart of their decision making and their structures there. So for me, that was, you know, a really fantastic company in that regard. Okay, so we have one company that you think is innovative here, Uber. Okay, so why do you think Uber is an innovative company? What do they do that is innovative?
Hi, my name is Maha. Actually, although there are some parts that I know about Uber which contradicts to this, but I like the basic fact that why was it actually established? First of all, there is a pain for everybody. So they quote on that pain and they turn it in an innovative way where you can find your solution for people actually to earn extra cash besides their jobs or if they're employed, and to keep track, which for parents, it was also a blessing to be able to know it's not like normal taxis. And from that, you can, they took it further and jumped into other things like delivery of food or so on. But the original part was basically something you can scale anywhere in the world. You can actually help people to get employed or extra cash. And it served a major thing for people, which is transportation in an easy, fast way anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I love this one as an example because they are perhaps the single company that embraced technology. And it was interesting because there's thousands, millions of successful taxi companies around the world making a lot of money, but none of them decided to embrace technology. It was not until this new startup really came and said, let's do that in a different way. Let's try to do all of those fantastic things that you've just said. So yeah, I really love Uber as an example of an innovative company and one with a great culture of innovation.
And with a great culture as well, because wherever is, you're not an employee, but everybody is part of this company without being actually employed there. So they're just building that culture of you're actually a part owner because you do your own thing and you take part of it as your own commission. So
Yeah.
it's one culture for everybody as well.
Yeah, and I think this is also an important reflection point, which is, you know, Uber, the same as with many startups that have scaled rapidly, does not necessarily have the perfect culture. So we're not saying that Uber is without problems, without you know, ethical concerns, without
True,
difficulties
true.
in their culture.
True.
But we are absolutely saying they're an innovative company and they have a great innovation culture. And now I think we're seeing them change a lot in the previous years about more, as you say, to partnership, rather than just having the senior leaders in the company making all the decisions, people having more of a voice now if you're a driver and those kind of things. So it's definitely a journey for them. And then we have Microsoft here as well, Yazan, you've said.
Yes, actually, I'm a big admirer of Microsoft. People would think like it's becoming more of a rigid, structured company, but I see that it has been very resilient and adaptive, given the fact that they were one of the first investors or the major, let's say, investors in OpenAI, for example. They have a lot of products. Maybe they're poor in regard to marketing, but they have a lot of very innovative products under their Azure platform that are very useful for a lot of people. They're adapting, they're being dynamic, understanding the trends, and trying to keep up with the changes and the development happening globally.
Yeah, I love this one because you know, Microsoft is perhaps the best example of a company with a growth mindset, which is, you know, a very, very important factor when it comes to innovation and cultures of innovation, because they moved from being a know-it-all company to a learn-it-all company. And you definitely saw that shift in the employees where they all wanted to be number one. They were all competing with one another. They didn't want to learn anything because they wanted to look good. And then the new CEO came and said, no, 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 I want you to learn together. I want you to experience new things, try new things, and have that growth mindset. And I think, you know, that's really, really important. And then I'm seeing some other wonderful comments here about Apple and Amazon, Apple and LinkedIn, what it's like to work there. The fact that LinkedIn is focused on its people is really, really important. And it's absolutely true that an innovative idea is not necessarily an innovative company culture. Yeah, and this is true. As we see, many companies hit upon a great idea and they think that's going to make them successful forever, and they don't innovate more and they don't know how. They just got lucky. And I think that's something to reflect on as well. We have to be humble enough to know that luck plays a part in our success. So with 20 minutes to go, I go into a really fun part now, which is we're going to look at two of the principles in detail from the culture advantage. We're going to look at the importance of leadership, and we're going to look at the importance of embracing technology. So let me spend just the next 10 minutes on leadership with you. And again, I want you to type into the chat box here, or feel free to speak up on these questions here. What makes a good leader? What do they say? What do they do? How do they operate? And who are some of your favorite leaders? They could be famous people. They could be people that you work with today or worked for previously. And of course, why do you think leadership is important? If you think it's important at all. Maybe you don't. Maybe you think leadership is not important. But if you think it's important and believe that it's important, do tell me why that could be the case. And whilst you consider those questions, I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide and just prepare a short video for you to watch. It's a 5 minutes video only. And you can think about those questions whilst watching the video. Could you hear the sound on the video, by the way? No. And can you see the video?
No.
No.
Okay, so I stop the share like this.
Yeah, make sure share sound on the bottom.
I'll click share sound and put this one. Okay, so I think we're gonna be able to see this now. and hear
Virus
this.
or COVID-19.
You could hear this? Okay, perfect. Okay, so this was the ex-CEO of Marriott. And this is a very important video to show you for 5 minutes. And I want you, as you watch this video, to think about what leadership characteristics is Arne Sorensen displaying during this video. So the COVID crisis came, and he recorded this video in March of 2020. So probably a week or 2 weeks after COVID was really spreading around the world. So put that in the back of your mind. Again, it's a case like in the bank. We didn't know about COVID. We didn't know what was going to happen. But when you watch this video, think about the qualities that he displays as a leader. And why have I chosen this video as a masterclass in leadership? And if you observe anything or have any reflections, please put them in the chat. And after 5 minutes, we'll make this discussion. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, Marriott Associates. I'm here to give you an update on the impact of coronavirus, or COVID-19, on our business and the steps we're taking to respond to it. Because of the profound impact COVID-19 is having on so many of us around the world, this is the most difficult video message we have ever pulled together. Our team was a bit concerned about using a video today because of my new bald look. Let me just say that my new look is exactly what was expected as a result of my medical treatments. I feel good, and my team and I are 100% focused on overcoming the common crisis we face. Now let's talk about that crisis, COVID-19. Let's start with the health challenge itself. Across our company, the number of COVID-19 infected associates is low, and I'm grateful for this. I want to acknowledge the associates who are dealing with it as a patient, a parent, family member, or friend, and the hundreds of Marriott colleagues who are at this minute quarantined. Our well wishes and thoughts are with all of you. In terms of our business, COVID-19 is like nothing we've ever seen before. For a company that's 92 years old, that's borne witness to the Great Depression, World War II, and many other economic and global crises, that's saying something. But here are the facts. COVID-19 is having a more severe and sudden financial impact on our business than 9/11 and the 2009 financial crisis combined. The worst quarter we had in those earlier crises saw a roughly 25% decline in hotel revenues on average across the globe. In this case, which began in Greater China in January, we quickly saw a 90% decline in our business in China. In the 2 months since, we have seen COVID-19 extend to the rest of the world. In most markets, our business is already running 75% below normal levels. The principal challenge we face is obvious. Governments all around the world are taking the steps to contain COVID-19. The restrictions on travel, gatherings of people, and required social distancing is having an immediate impact by depressing demand for our hotels. As a result, we have hotels around the world that can't operate without incurring substantial economic losses and risking permanently their ability to reopen when this gets behind us. This has caused hundreds of hotels to close or start the process of closing until such time as demand begins to return. Given these circumstances, we've been forced to take proactive steps to respond to the crisis and are putting into place business contingency plans globally. While pieces of these continent contingency plans vary, given the differences in local laws and the geographies where we operate, certain elements are universal. We've worked to take controllable costs out of the business, like suspending all non-essential travel. We have paused all new hires, with the exception of a small number of mission-critical positions. We have stopped all hotel initiatives for 2020 and have gone dark on our brand marketing and advertising during this period. Both Mr. Marriott and I will not be taking any salary for the balance of 2020, and my executive team will be taking a 50% cut in pay. Above property around the world, we are moving to shortened work weeks, and in the US, we are also putting in place temporary leaves for at least the next 60 to 90 days that will impact most associates at our headquarters and above property locations. At the property level, contingency plans vary by geography and hotel occupancy rates, but for open hotels include closing food and beverage outlets, reducing staff, and closing floors of hotels. More details about these actions and what they mean will be shared through local HR teams. If there is any good news visible today, it is the signs of early recovery in Greater China. China appears to have succeeded in reducing the spread of COVID-19 through strong counteractions. China is now bringing manufacturing back online, and we are seeing some early signs of lodging demand begin to return. If this holds, it may bode well for the course of this epidemic in other parts of the world. In 2 weeks, I will mark my 8th anniversary as CEO, a position I accepted on the heels of 2 legends in hospitality. As a leader, I've experienced so many wonderful highs and a good number of challenging lows. I can tell you that I have never had a more difficult moment than this one. There is simply nothing worse than telling highly valued associates, people who are the very heart of this company, that their roles are being impacted by events completely outside of their control. I've never been more determined to see us through than I am at this moment. While it's impossible to know how long this crisis will last, I know we as a global community will come through the other side, and that when we do, our guests will be eager to travel this beautiful world again. When that great day comes, we will be there to welcome them with the warmth and care we are known for the world over. As I close, I encourage you to please take care of yourself, your friends and family, and the community around you. I wish you good health and a sense of optimism. Together, we can and we will overcome this, and we'll thrive once again. Thank you, and be well.
Okay, so, one of the most impactful videos that I think I've ever watched personally. Does anybody have anything to put into the chat in regards to what did you think about that video? What type of behaviors was the CEO showing? Okay, so I see here the first comment, empathy, 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 and people. Absolutely. This was a leader who was being truly empathetic, truly understanding of what was happening to the people. My big takeaway here was he understood that this was a difficult time. He understood that people were uncertain, didn't have the answers. And I think that is the real sign of empathy there, and putting people first. He didn't talk about financial implications to the companies first. He talked about implications to the employees first and foremost. Absolutely. He was honest and personal in his approach. He started with a very brave personal story. Unfortunately, the bad news to share with you is a few years ago, or 1 year ago, Arne Sorensen died. He passed away because he was with cancer. And this is the story that he shared at the start. He said, I have a bald look. I don't have any hair on my head, and I'm doing a video. This is because I'm having cancer treatment, which the employees knew about. So he was very personal at the start. And he was really caring about his team. You could see in the video that he was brought to tears nearly at one point when he was talking about the layoffs and the redundancies. So I think, very much team focused. Any other reflections that people have? I put a few more reflections here on the screen that I was having myself as I was watching this, why I was thinking this was a masterclass in leadership. He was really making this video, which was cheap and easy to produce. This was him doing a video with one camera, making mistakes as he was talking, not doing multiple takes, not doing different angles. How many CEOs do you see that do that kind of video? Not many. Good that you love Marriott more now. Me too. This is absolutely the case. We should all travel with Marriott as and when we can. And we can relate to his feelings as well. I think this is very important. He really focuses on the personal differences and realizes that we're all individuals. One of the best parts was he takes the 100% pay cut and says that his senior team is taking 50% pay cut. This was when we didn't really know if COVID was going to have a big impact or not. But he said, I'm going to be the first person to do this. I'm in this with you as individuals. So not shifting the blame or putting things elsewhere. He was there on the trenches. And I think you as founders or as a founding team, as leaders in your companies, we have to ask the question of ourselves, how are you the company? You need to be the role model. You can have a big influence when you're a great leader. So do feel free to watch this video again and really reflect upon it. I think it's a wonderful masterclass in leadership. And I think we can all learn a lot from this. And the final thing, just to close the session today, is just to talk to you and share something about embracing technology, which I guess you're all pretty good at doing because you're all in the startup world. You're all no doubt looking at new technology. But I think one of the common misconceptions that most people have is that if you throw digital technology at the problem, you're digital. And this is not the case. Digital transformation does not mean implementing and using digital technology in your company. It means being digital, operating in a digital way. So you need the technology, but you also need the infrastructure, which is you need to be a real-time company. You need to be able to make decisions in real time based upon the technology. You need to have organizational structures which are more or less flat, so decision-making can happen. You need different types of profiles in your companies. You need data scientists. You need artificial intelligence engineers. You need to build career pathways for people. And culture is your driver. So for me, this whole misnomer about digital transformation is just throwing technology at the problem is not quite true. You need to have your culture. You need to operate digitally. And also we need to not be scared about this because at the end of the day, transforming your business is becoming more digital. So digital transformation is just business transformation. So that's the first thing I just wanted to share. Don't be scared about digital, but really try to embrace it. And I don't know if you know Charles Darwin. He didn't actually say this quote, but I think if he was alive today, he would have said it's the survival of the clickiest. The people who are the most digital are the ones who are going to succeed. And, you know, we've always been scared of technology. We always thought that when the internet came about, it would take away all the jobs. And, you know, people were nervous. I remember when the internet was there, people were nervous of this. When the millennium happened, we all thought all the computers were going to go down in the year 2000. Things would stop working. We've been scared about technology and we continue to be scared about technology. But really, when you look at history, you don't have to be scared. So look at the internet. McKinsey made a study a few years after the internet was fully embedded, and they found for every one job that was destroyed, 2.6 new jobs were created. So it's about changing of the way we work, having more opportunities. They also found that global GDP increased by 10% because of the internet. And I think the same will happen as we move into this Web3. The same things will happen again and again. And I just wanted to ask, has anybody used one of these machines before in their life? Not necessarily this one in the picture, but has anybody used an ATM for their banking services? You can just wave at the camera or put yes into the chat if you used it. Okay, good. So we don't have weird people on the call. We have normal people. 99% of the people have used an ATM. They are not scary things. But of course, when they were first introduced, they were scary. People thought that the branches would close, that there would no longer be customer service agents, that there would be no jobs. But let me tell you, what happened in the banking industry with this new technology was more branches were opened and more jobs were created. Why? Because the technology made the cost to serve the customer lower. Humans could deal with complex queries, and the easy things like putting in and taking out money would be done by the machines. It was a good thing, and this pattern repeats time and time again. And actually, it repeated in China during COVID with a company called Lin Quinzhan. And I'm sure none of you have heard of this company. And if you have, I will have to give you $100 because I haven't met anyone outside of China who knows them. But Lin Quinzhan is a cosmetics company in China. It did 98% of its revenue in physical shops, in stores. And of course, when COVID came, they lost 98% of their revenue overnight. They didn't really have a mail order business. They didn't have a digital business. And their chief executive wrote to the employees and said, we have two options. One is we close the company and we're unemployed. Or the second is we try to embrace technology and see how we can do things in a different way. And the employees said, let's embrace technology. And they have wonderful apps in China that let you, they're like social media apps combined with payments apps, combined with interaction and bank accounts, everything all in one app, basically. And they decided to use their shop sales assistants and turn them into social media influencers. So they took the same staff using their mobile phones, and these staff would do live shopping events on their mobile phones. And they would explain to customers how to put on the makeup, how to take off the makeup, and then they would sell the products through the app. And Lin Quinzhan actually sold more products in a 4-hour live shopping event than a store did in a month. So they exceeded their revenue. They had happy customers and they had employees who were still employed, having jobs. So they did what I say is digitalize their value. Now, of course, in the case of the banks and the ATMs, we were very proactive in bringing ATMs to market. But Lin Quinzhan was very reactive in their digital adoption. And I just wanted to leave you with 5 proactive strategies about what you can try to do to embrace digital in a more in-depth time, in a more in-depth way. The first thing you can do, and it's free of charge really, is you can sense and scout and research what's happening in the market. You can ask some consultancy companies to come and give you a presentation. You can ask some vendors. You can ask people like Dr. Yazan or myself to give you information about the market. All of this we do for free. I mean, people are willing to give information about what's happening, what customers are thinking. You need to also make sure you have time to discuss technology. So again, being a digital technology company is not just buying a piece of software and implementing it. It's about having discussions. It's making sure that you have dedicated time in meetings to discuss new technology and how to apply it. You can also partner with companies. So partner with people who are not necessarily in your industry. Renault, the car manufacturer, is a good example of this. They work with LG, the electronics manufacturing company. And now in Renault cars, they have wonderful touch screens and fantastic screens in their cars that they didn't manufacture and produce. LG did it in partnership with them. You can also try to experiment. And of course, we all know the very famous story of Gmail, the internet, the email system that Google created. One engineer in Google invented this in their 20% time, in their free time, basically. How much free time do you give to your employees to think about technology and experiment on things? And of course, you need to recruit the right people as well. So when you look at the top companies, the top performing companies, actually they have 31% people on their board with technology skills compared to 17% of low performing companies. So having the right skills at board level is important as well. So I hope you enjoyed the session today. I'm going to be back, as I say, in a couple of weeks' time, and I hope we can continue the conversation. If you do want to have a copy of the book and read that, do just email info@danielstrode.com. Details are in the chat, and I will get that sent out to you. And I just wanted to leave you with this final piece of advice here, which is a quote from a Dutch fellow. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Now, I love this when it comes to culture, because when you think about culture in your companies, you need to improve the environment you have, not the people. The people will change and adapt and grow as long as you give them the environment, as long as you have the right culture, which is the right resources, the right nutrients, the right water and sunlight, you will succeed. So if something's not working in your company, or you want to go faster or try something new, try to adapt your culture, not the people. That should be your first approach. And I hope you've learned a few things today. If you have any doubts or questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the team here, and we'll be more than delighted to help you. And, you know, I hope I didn't scare you at the start by saying the fourth industrial revolution is causing lots of companies to fail, and it's a difficult time. I hope you see the opportunity that you have as startup founders and leaders, and that your culture will help you become successful. So thank you so much for your attention today, and putting all the comments in the chat and speaking up. And I'll just pass back to Dr. Yazan for any final comment and wrap up.
Daniel, this has been absolutely delightful. I mean, I always, even though we're constantly talking, you and I, about culture, people, leadership development, there's always something new to learn. I love the examples that you used, very grounded, very simple, and indicative of these big concepts. So, you know, what you gave us today are principles, thinking frameworks, rather than just something very prescriptive, because you can't be prescriptive when it comes to culture, because one thing might work in one company and it then might not work in another. Culture is unique, just like every person is unique. It's like DNA of sorts. So Daniel, thank you so much for your input. I love the quote at the end. I picked it up from you with one of the masterclass we did for a client last year, and I used it in my course this time. And I forgot that you were given also the same course. And I noticed some people in the classroom, and I saw their eyes. They're like, "Oh, you've seen it?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is, you know, I took this from Daniel." So I love that quote. It really captures, you know, what culture is. You know, another quote that I really love and I use is from The Little Prince. What is necessary is often invisible. And, you know, when you talk about the air and the nutrients of culture, I think that applies as well. So thank you all for also joining us for CORE, one of the CORE's continuous masterclasses. Those will be available and uploaded to YouTube. We've had a good number on live stream as well attend. So thank you to those people as well. And lastly, Daniel, you know, thank you very much. Looking forward to our upcoming conversation and to the following masterclass, which is going to be on August 2nd, which is kind of going to be around the feedback around the culture advantage. So taking it more down to implementation. So I invite everybody to bring your cultural issues and concerns and questions, the how-tos of sorts, so that we can have a vibrant and fruitful discussion. So thank you all for attending.